Ken, it is good to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Pedram, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Great to see you.
Man, it's been a minute, and I love catching up with old friends because there's work that you're doing that's so relevant to the people that are listening, and you're in the trenches. My favorite kind of doctor is the one that still practices and sees people. It's really easy to get into the realm of speculation, conjecture, and theory and forget that the practice of medicine means, feedback coming from humans coming back and being like, hey, man, that thing that you said, it made me worse. It hurt, didn't work. And so the feedback loop that comes from the humans that you're trying to help, I think is an integral part of medicine. And a lot of the people out there spewing health advice, for a lot of them have never seen a patient, and a lot of them haven't been seeing patients for a long time. So my hat's off to you for remaining a clinician, first and foremost.
Thank you. It is interesting because while you're just out there doing this grind, I mean, I'm 25 years into this, and I know that we all want to talk about randomized placebo-controlled trials and everything, but there was a time where, your anecdotal experience carried a lot of weight. And I'm at this point where I'm like, okay, this is what the data is showing, but I'm seeing this clinical success. If we do it like this, let's see how it works for you.
But to me, that's still an N of one scientific experiment, because you said the end of it was most important is let's see, first of all, do no harm. And secondly, all right, this, the data suggests this could help. Let's see how this works for you. And if they come back glowing and say, holy crap, my X, Y, or Z went away, you're like, all right, well, that worked for Mrs. Jones. Let's maybe try it again, right? But at least it's still a scientific process moving forward.
Exactly. I think that is the basis of all medicine. If you understand the physiology and then you understand the pathophysiology, if you're going to try something, if it makes sense on that level, then you can discuss it with your patient and say, let's go ahead and try this. It appears that this should work well. There's not a lot of data on it, but we do know that it is very safe. And just like you said, first, do no harm. So that's kind of how I practice medicine. I'm a traditionally trained gastroenterologist, and I have sort of evolved into a much more functional world. And I live between those two worlds where I will look at using pharmaceutical medications, but I am also realizing that there's all these other lifestyle things that merit a lot more attention, lifestyle and possibly natural treatment. So that's where I'm at in my career right now.
So for those of you who recognize his voice or are seeing this in video, Dr. Ken was one of the stars of my Interconnected series years back, and he's still out there doing it, right? He's doing it and seeing patients. I actually have a good story to start with. It was in the 90s. Younger Pedram, full head of hair in Peru, decides to get the trout at a restaurant, not realizing that it came from the filthy river right behind that restaurant. Because, you don't understand supply chains of things when you grow up in America. You just figure it comes out of a truck. I don't know. Got really, really sick and ended up taking Cipro because it was bad and saved the day. But for a few years afterwards, nobody understood that the Cipro, following basically a really bad infection in the small intestine, can shut down the migrating motor complex and create problems with intestinal motility and SIBO. So a guy who's never had problems with his gut before, all of a sudden after all this, I'm like, God, apricots, dried apricots. No more. Right. And it took years for the science of it to catch up, to be like, oh, this is what's happening. And being on the ground floor, the cutting edge of it, if you will, doing the robotic surgeries and all that, I'm sure you're seeing more and more of that become mainstream. But it was just a big mystery. It's not like I don't have friends in the business, right? No one knew what to do with it for a while, a long while.
Well, I guess it was, I hate when you start thinking about years and you just realize that it's probably like longer than what I'm going to say, but it's at least 14 years probably. COVID did throw that big wrinkle into all of our time frames. But I was at a dinner program and a doctor was giving a lecture and he was talking about a completely different process, hepatic encephalopathy. And I hung out with him afterwards, had a few glasses of wine, and he had a lab with animals. And he said that, and this is Dr. Mark Pimentel at Cedars-Sinai, where he was first uncovering this whole concept of bacterial overgrowth. And he was describing his mouse models. And he was saying, I think I'm onto something here. I think that irritable bowel is actually due to this bacteria. And then he explained the whole process. And I was like, that is insane. That is so cool. And then 4 years after that, he contacted me, said, we're going to do a drug trial. Would you like to be part of that? And that was part of that drug trial. But it is fascinating because he was the first person to sit there and talk about this kind of stuff while doing clinical research. While that's going on, I am meeting slowly as I'm doing this research. I'm meeting people, patients that would show up that were on the internet, and they would start bringing this up to me. And I'm like, how did you hear about this? How do you even realize this could be a potential thing? I just learned about this from the guy that's using animal models. They're not even looking at human trials yet on this. And so it's one of the problems in traditional medicine is that if a new concept is brought forward, it's almost ubiquitously just rejected unless there's like this big, massive trial and a drug company is pushing it. And then just slowly over the years, my colleagues have sort of gone, oh, okay, this is being accepted because patients are showing up and patients are bringing it because of this access to all this information. With the internet just exploded over that time, and people could sit there and get on forums, and they could talk to people, and they could find out that other people had beneficial things. And it's taken literally that long for a lot of my colleagues to start embracing some of these different concepts. Many of my colleagues still have no idea what bacterial overgrowth is. IBS is in your head. It's depression. You're feeling miserable because, Pedram, you may have tried to blame this trout from the dirty river, but maybe you're just stressed. That's the most common thing that people talk about.
Or you're also sensitive to dairy. There must have been dairy in something. I was trying to be careful, right? And
Yeah.
so with food sensitivities, it's like all bets are off if you go through an airport and you got to eat somewhere. And so the supply chain and the chain of custody of the food that gets to you is always in question. And so a lot of people live in this nebulous cloud of, I don't know why I don't feel well. And you brought up a point that I think is important, because I've had a lot of people come in through my clinics over the years and be like, well, I went to my GI guy and he said he scoped it and it was pink and beautiful, so there's nothing wrong with you. So you're a guy who runs these scopes. And so I need the listeners to understand what that optical assay is showing and what it's not showing, because this guy was so convinced that his little robotic camera was the answer to all things GI for this person. And he spoke with such authority that this person was just kind of browbeaten into being like, okay, I guess I'm fine. Right. So what do we know and what do we not know from the scopes?
It is very, very frustrating for people. They go to a gastroenterologist and they get scopes done. The doctor looks in their stomach, their esophagus, they take biopsy of the small bowel of the stomach. They may do a colonoscopy at the same time, and then the patient wakes up and it's good news. Everything's normal. You're fine. And then they walk out and they're like, doctor says I'm fine. I still feel really bad. I still am super bloated. I still feel like I have brain fog. I still have all these other symptoms, but they're just told that everything's fine. So from my perspective, the scopes are absolutely fundamental because we have to make sure that there's not something more going on. And so I find celiac disease all the time in people that had no idea that they could potentially have celiac. I've found lymphoma, I've found ulcers, we find bacteria, we find parasites, we find all these things. And then, of course, let's not even get into the whole colon cancer aspect, because when we do that, I'm finding precancerous colon polyps in 20-year-olds on the regular now. So something's going on where we're seeing this, where this is the first generation that's having more colon cancer than their parents. So there is value to these scopes, tremendous value. When I talk to somebody, I'm like, okay, this is great news. You didn't have cancer, you don't have ulcerative colitis, you don't have celiac, and you don't have Crohn's disease. Super important. We may have found a precancerous polyp, we removed it, you just had a cure for colon cancer. Now, let's work with your symptoms. Now it's all the way back to the history. Now it's talking. Now it's just investigative. Let's look at what's going on. Because just like you said, the easiest thing to do is just say, well, let's blame what you're eating. And you find people that just continually cut out different foods to the point where they're down to like 4 foods and they're not exactly enjoying their life. I mean, let's be honest, when you break bread with your friends and family, that is a social thing. This is how, in the tribal environment, this is how we connect with other people. And when you're the one person that can't eat any of the things that everybody else is eating, you feel a little bit disconnected and you feel like you can't engage. So it isn't just avoiding everything. Let's just try and figure out exactly what it could be. And more often than not, obviously, I'm a little bit biased because I kind of get funneled people that are looking for a second, third, fourth opinion. And we do end up finding just a ton of issues where it comes down to the microbiome or it comes down to bacterial overgrowth, meaning bacteria growing where it shouldn't be. But the scopes are essential because if one of those major things get missed, and I'll just say this from my perspective, I get a lot of people that got disillusioned with traditional medicine, and then they'll go and see some functional dietitians, functional people, and possibly even Eastern medicine, things like that, where the initial reaction is not to go see a traditional gastroenterologist. Maybe they saw one, they didn't have a good experience. And I said, well, look, we just need to make sure, let's do a scope. And very surprising, I will find like occult Crohn's in the small bowel, ulcers in the ileum. So we do find things. So it is not the hang your hat on, you're fine thing, but it's also, you need to make sure that something else is not going on, which is the key to these scopes.
Yeah, well, I think you're speaking to the breadth of the modern physician and the call out of stepping out of just a very narrow band of medicine, which is, okay, well, we went down the algorithm and it wasn't any of these things. Then the bedside manner doesn't turn into, now piss off, there's nothing wrong with you, but you're still complaining about something, so let me listen. And that's where the functional medicine workup and all these other elements of saying, well, no one's got time to come over here. I mean, some people do, right? But no one really wants to take time out of their lives and sit in my waiting room and pay money and all this kind of crap if they weren't feeling well. So at face value, she's not feeling well. What is it? And so then the other side of it, the market side of alt wellness, and it's just, oh, well, it's obviously because you're not taking my probiotic. My probiotic's better than his probiotic. And it just becomes this like product supplement dance off. And I know you have a lot of opinions about probiotics versus polyphenols versus the ecosystem and all that. So I would love to just take a quick ride through botanicals, polyphenols, and bacterial balance and how we are learning to look at the microbiome versus saying, oh, you're replete in certain acidophilus and that's your problem.
Before we jump into that, I do want to quote somebody. I went to a lecture and it was a pediatric gastroenterologist, and he opened his lecture with this. When a mother brings her child to you and says he's sick, these are my 3 top rules. The mother's right, the mother's right, the mother's right. And what I think about that as an adult gastroenterologist, when somebody says they're sick, they're right, they're sick. Let's look at it instead of saying everything's normal, you're fine. So I just think about that when we talk about when somebody's sitting in the waiting room. You're exactly right. They made the trouble of going. They made the trouble of paying the money to see me, and they're right. I'm the person that has to figure out what is going on. But getting back to your question, when we talk about these, there's been explosion, and certainly on social media, that gut health is super important, and it is. All health begins and ends in the gut. If your gut is inflamed, you're going to be inflamed. And there's tremendous business opportunities, and people really want to jump on this. And so there's all different kinds of supplements out there. And if you really look at this, there's a lot of data, and a lot of the data says that certain things work, certain things help a little bit, certain things don't work at all. When you point out my whole probiotic thing, it's just that looking at the studies, talking to the doctors, most traditional probiotics don't survive through the digestive tract and get to where we want them to go. That being said, if a patient comes in and they're on a probiotic, I just had somebody in that was on one that I'm not a big fan of. And I'm like, does that make you feel better? And she said, yes. And I'm like, fantastic. Then that's working for you, period. And we can talk about the data, but it's working for you. So it's great. So there is no black and white about what is good, what is bad. It's what works for you kind of thing. And if a certain probiotic works great, my problem is through my lens, everybody that I see has tried 30 probiotics. Everybody that I see has tried so many over-the-counter supplements that they're frustrated, and they've spent a lot of money, and they've been to several different functional practitioners of various kinds, dietitians, chiropractors, functional medicine doctors, acupuncturists, and people have tried different things with them, and they're somewhat exhausted, and they're like, I don't want to try anymore. I want to find out what's wrong, and let's be a little bit more targeted on what we're going to do. So That's kind of how I feel about the whole gestalt of the current industry right now, is that there's a lot of frustrated people and there's a lot of businesses which can maybe make a little bit of money with it. Maybe it's totally valid. But the bottom line is, if you feel better on it, awesome. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's an individual sport here.
One of the great frustrations I had, so I spent 18 months traveling the country, partially the world, making the first series called Interconnected, which you were in. And, it's a lot of effort trying to get the right conversation stoked with the brightest minds about how to eat, how to look at overall health and all these types of things. And I think we did a pretty good job. The series really opened eyes to the science of the microbiome and the promise of this new kind of concept of immunology and microbiology kind of coming together and all that. And I'll never forget, I had a meeting with customer service and they're like, man, we really need a macro for this. I'm like, what is it? They're like, we have 12,700 tickets that say, yeah, but what probiotic do you recommend? And so nobody even wants to listen to, hey, what are you eating?
Yeah.
The promise of the magic pill is so strong in the marketing, the lexicon, and the ethos of like just all medicines, not just the, Western medicine, drugs, pharma, fine, translate to naturopaths and they replace the drugs with supplements. It's still a single vector solution or a multi-vector solution to the same type of algorithm. But how I'm eating and how I'm living and whether I'm stressed and whether my sleep is involved, man, that's squishy. And so those conversations are harder to have because that involves Mrs. Jones actually like showing up and paying attention and all that. So how do you broach that with your folks?
When I sit there and start thinking about what in the pyramid of the most important things and work our way down, even though I'm in the business and I do research and supplements and things like that, but I start with the most important thing with my patients. And fortunately, I get to see it often because we put people to sleep and I can see if they snore. I can see if they drop their oxygen saturations. And I ask this one thing: if you're not sleeping well, nothing's working. Like, we have to get you sleeping first. You have to have proper sleep hygiene. You have to go through a whole process where you're getting your sleep. And we talk about sleep, and that is to me like the foundation of it, because if you're doom scrolling at midnight right before you're going to bed and you don't get into your proper sleep cycles, that affects your migrating motor complex in your gut, that affects your cortisol level in your brain, that affects all these other things. So I really like to go hard in the paint on sleep, because that's at least one variable. If I sit there and look at you and be like, oh, Pedram, you need to eat right and exercise, which is the common dictum. If you go see a cardiologist that says your cholesterol is up and your blood pressure is a little high, be like, eat right, exercise. Well, what does that mean? Well, we could sit there and say, okay, first, get your sleep right, the most important thing. Then next level, I honestly think the second most important thing is definitely nutrition, eating whole foods, avoid highly processed. And then with my patients, I really work on the third, what is very important to me, because throughout my life, I've had quite a bit of anxiety and things like that. And that is stress reduction. And not just saying you need to be less stressed. It's, what are you doing once you've got your sleep down, once you're eating a whole food diet? Now let's work on this stress idea, because this whole stress concept affects everything also. So I don't even get into my business, that I would love to sit there and look at everybody and be like, hey, take this, you'll be fine. But nobody's going to be fine if those three things aren't happening. You being a doctor of Eastern medicine, is that how you were trained as well?
Honestly, if your mind is not focused on the things that are important, the energy goes where the mind is scattered, and the energy scatters and nothing works. And so sleep is obviously the best medicine, and stress management is kind of a central operating system. But you're now flying right into the Death Star with torpedoes ready to go, because now you're challenging the way we live and the way we spend our time and the way we are running this shit show that we call life. And those are bigger questions. Those are hard, right? And that's where I think the real medicine comes in for me, is where are you spending your heartbeats? If you're not valuing your sleep, Nothing else works, but you're over here trying to remediate and throw a Band-Aid on a knee you keep kicking into a rock, right? And that's the form of medicine we've all been relegated to, because we're not allowed to say, maybe you should slow down, like God forbid, right? And so it's a central part of our entire medicine. It's a central part of everything. It's just, if your mind can't stop time for you to reset. What I'm doing now is working on this concept that I've been studying a lot on, this literature on neuroception. And I want to talk about this in context of bloating, but interoception and proprioception, all these different layers of our perception have been blunted because we're not paying attention to any of the signals. And so I could have gas, bloating, stomach pain, acid reflux, and all these things, and not understand the signals coming from my body months before this became an ulcer or became X, Y, and Z, because I'm just not present enough until there's enough pain to make me look at it. And so that, to me, has become a very big part of the way I practice medicine, is bringing their attention back from the fragmented attention economy and folding it back on the priorities in their life. Okay, so you say you want to be healthy. What do we have to do to get there? What do we have to give up to get there? Is it the doom scrolling? Is it the whatever that is? Those priorities need to be in place, and then all the remedial stuff starts to work better. But without sleep, the party's over. And who do you know that gets good sleep?
Yeah. Well, it's a running joke in my house because I wake up at 4. So to wake up at 4, I have to be in bed shutting down at 9. So it's a running joke. I could be at a dinner party and I'm like, it's 9, we got to go, because I'm up at 4. So
totally. It's being the life of the party is not worth it.
Yeah, I guess I occasionally break that rule at baby bathwater, but other than that, I try to sit there and do that. But it's very interesting because you say that, because the neuroception, let's keep in mind that there is absolutely a brain-gut connection. And so if we extrapolate that further out for years, if you do not have this neuroception, or your brain is sort of running autonomously and you don't feel like you're in total control, you go to sleep and people say, this is what my patients tell me all the time: I have racing thoughts at 1 a.m. I can't shut it down, and this is what's going on. So your brain is just sort of doing this. Well, we do know that can affect your gut. And just like you said, bloating, acid reflux, constipation, change in bowel habits, there's a direct connection. And we have neurotransmitters in our gut, which we also have in our brain. And so it is totally connected, back and forth, a two-way street. Then if you keep that going and you're like, well, I can still manage. I have this old Wolf of Wall Street attitude that I can work 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, and all these other things. Well, we do know that over time, that brain-gut connection leads to gut inflammation, which then circles back and creates inflammation. And now we realize that this epidemic of dementia actually could be tied to the gut about 15 years before. So what you're talking about is breaking the cycle before it begins, which I love.
It's hard because until there's a problem, the show must go on. And the way our lives are situated right now, it's like, I got to get this kid to camp, and then, the tutor, and then my wife has this thing. And we are so strung out trying to keep up with our social obligations and the things that we think we need to do because his kid got into Harvard and I can't not. It's so exhausting being us. And so we don't stop to say, okay, well, maybe the kid doesn't need 7 sports in a season. We could focus on 1. And let them work their creative imagination, which means dad's not driving them and I'm not paying for it, which means I work less, and all the things that go into the calculus of pumping the brakes and reconsidering the cadence of our lives, right? And I think that neuroception is just the tip of the iceberg, because what is it? It's like, do I feel safe, right? And I have a story that I brought back from Europe where I had some endotoxemia and I was having insomnia. And at 2 a.m, I'm sitting here playing whack-a-mole with my thoughts because I'm a good meditator. And I'm like, God, this is a guy who studied with the Dalai Lama. I can't meditate this off. What is this? And I realized I'm trying to yell at the baby and say, shut up. The baby was crying because something was wrong. And as I started to listen to the subtle signaling of my body, I'm like, wow, I have some weird like alarm bells going off in my body. What is that? And I'm like, oh my God, my gut. And so the awareness folded back on the signals. Like Ken Brown's gut doesn't speak English. It could speak anxiety. It could speak insomnia. It could speak
Mm,
bloating. There's a
love
lot of
it.
different languages in the body, but
Love it.
we don't interpret that way, right? Pain's like the last in line and we're like, ouch,
Yeah.
Advil.
Yeah. Good point. I had a patient today. I did we call it surveillance colonoscopy, and great mood, comes in, and we do them every few years. And we see a lot of people. And then I look at his chart and I'm like, oh, I diagnosed colon cancer on this guy 12 years ago. And he's like, hey, doc. And he's like, remember that day? He's like, that was the greatest and worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm like, greatest? Like, that's interesting. And he goes, yeah, I reframed my whole world 12 years ago. I'm waiting in this same building, same everything. I'm the same doctor. And he's like, it's deja vu, but it changed my whole world. He's like, I was just a mess. And you sat me down. You got the CAT scan immediately. You got the surgeon immediately. It had metastasized to his liver. He just had kind of relegated that this was it. And fortunately, good doctors. And he's here 12 years later. But it was interesting because he's in a great mood. And he's like, it actually got me to just stop and realize life is finite. I have to deal with this. And it was the most pressing thing for him. And he learned to slow down, enjoy. And he's like, remember when I came to your office and you're like, there is good data to show that being happy, being loving others has been shown to benefit people with cancer. So he's like, so I worked really hard to do these things. And he goes, and then that just carried over. And so I just saw him today, just a few hours ago, 12 years later. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So when you're talking about that, there are shocking events that force you, when you say eventually pain or something, but when you get that questionable diagnosis of something really bad, and you either panic and you do this, or you lean into it a little bit and say, okay, this is the most important thing in my life. And interestingly, because of his very high stress job and all these other things, it actually allowed him to learn how to be with himself, learn how to be in the moment, the self-aware components, talk to his friends and family, and develop relationships. And I think that all played into it. It was stage 4 metastatic colon cancer. 12 years later, he's laughing about it. He goes, I'm the happiest I've ever been. I don't think I'd be here. I think I would have died of a heart attack had it not been that. So the body's fascinating.
It's unfortunate that the messenger oftentimes has to be the bugle called cancer, right? Like I remember there was a sign in my Kung Fu school. I don't remember the context, but it was like, if you were in the forest and you got surrounded by 12 hungry tigers, what's the first thing you do? Everyone kind of thinks about it. And the answer was, number 1, stop pretending. All of the pretense falls away. And now you're just a dude in the woods who's trying to stay alive. And a guy with a cancer diagnosis that's metabolized to his liver, that is being surrounded by tigers, right? That is like, oh shit, I'm dead. So if I got a new lease on life, how do I make better decisions? And that's really been kind of the bleeding edge of where my brain goes in healthcare is, how can I get the degree of emotional buy-in on that aha realization for someone listening to this right now who's just, taking some seed oils, having some GMO. And you alluded to this at the beginning of the call, is that you're seeing more and more scopes of people in their 30s and 40s with precancerous lesions. So it's coming for all of us if we eat the way society has turned to eat, if we don't take care of the colonies in our gut. And so the incidence is higher, right? Not 1-to-1 that's coming for you, but statistically speaking, more and more people are getting this younger. First of all, why? I mean, if you know that. And secondly, then how do we reframe the fear of that guy and the come to Jesus moment that guy had to say, how about starting to eat healthy now? How about we fix this before it's cancer?
Yeah. I listen to a lot of health influencers, or I guess they'll just get fed to me occasionally on social media. And you have these two sides where people really attack the highly processed seed oils, high fructose corn syrup, all these other things. Then you have other people saying, well, there are no randomized placebo-controlled trials. There's no evidence to support this. this is BS. In a talk I give, there is a graph of adolescent ADHD and depression. And it just is a flat line till around 1978. And then it starts to rise with obesity. And that really coincides with the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. And then a little bit later, this big rise of ADHD and depression in adolescents, in children. And that really coincides with all the other aspects of the processed food industry, the emulsifiers, the highly processed seed oils, omega-6 over omega-3. But those are the years that they were introduced when you can kind of see this sort of rise. So although there's no randomized placebo-controlled trials, you can go back in time and just kind of watch a graph change. We're like, are we really just ignoring that right there? So I think that you can look at history. Maybe we don't need these large randomized placebo-controlled trials. Maybe a little history goes a long way.
I'm a big fan of the randomized control trials, but I'm also growing increasingly cynical in my old age. I'm turning 50 in less than a month.
Looking good.
That's it, man. That's it.
You're looking good.
Feeling great, man. Feeling great. I'm stronger than I've ever been. Went on a hike in the hot forest of Austin yesterday and just sweat through my shirt and felt amazing and started running. And so, knock wood, it's good to be here. But I got to say, I get a lot of this. They're building a Death Star stuff that has come to my desk for the last 20 years, right? It's, it's the man, it's the man, it's the man. And in the last year or so, just the amount that's starting to stack to show that, the game is rigged and how it's almost impossible for people to do these big, large scale studies without funding from big pharma or the NIH or these kind of top down organizations to get the data in the format that's acceptable. To prove good science is challenging and gamed in some ways because the money is not in it. And so you just did a control trial. You with your Atrantil product, you were involved in some stuff, and small scale studies. Yes. Big RCTs get harder, right? So speak to what the difficulties are as a medical researcher in getting studies that big done.
Wow. It is. I see both sides of the story. So I can play in a debate class, I can play either side on this one, because when I was doing pharmaceutical research, so they would present. So what happens is a drug study gets through the initial phase 1, phase 2 trial. And by the time it's phase 3, where we really have to see in humans and larger scale, then they go around and they do these multi-center areas. So they go and you have a research division, you review the inclusion exclusion criteria. So who gets this? And then I get a form that says, we will pay you this to evaluate people. We'll pay you this if they make it to their first visit, second visit, third visit. And then you get this kind of big payout if they make it all the way through. And then that's how you fund your research division. Unlike an academic center that is only doing NIH grants, which is typically those phase 1, phase 2 trials, now we're getting into the nitty gritty, the really expensive stuff, because they have to pay the people, they have to pay the researcher. And by the time they've gone to here, they're probably already 20 million in R&D at this point before they've even begun this thing. And to put it in perspective, when I was doing the trial with Dr. Pimentel on this antibiotic called Xifaxan, they had gone all the way through it. It looked good. It was 9% better than placebo, but that was good enough for the FDA. And they hired a whole sales force, and they actually asked me to be a speaker, and I was going to fly down to Arizona, and there were going to be this big launch. And then the FDA said, no, never mind. We want more data. So that study, I'll be close if I say this, but I think it was about $40 million just in that one study. And then they had already hired people that had quit their jobs. And then the FDA said, no, we need more data. So then they had to do another one for another 30 million before they finally got the approval. So you could see that if you're a drug company going through all of this, you kind of have to stack the deck in your favor a little bit, meaning my inclusion criteria. So I want to know if this particular drug works in 50-year-old men. I only want people with a martial arts background, that have a meditation background, that have a doctorate in Eastern medicine, because these are the people that I know will finish this trial. And so that's the inclusion criteria. The exclusion criteria, it's people that have failed other things, all these other things. So there is this kind of stacking the deck when you start working with humans. Statistically, you have a pretty good idea that you're going to have this number in the end. They've got really good statisticians. They've got people that have already done it in small numbers and people. So the drug companies do kind of stack the deck where if they're going to go for it, they're going to recoup their cost if they're this deep into it, because more than likely they've had 10 failures in the phase 1, phase 2 trials that they've already put some money into it. And a lot of times I just listened to Andrew Huberman had the new NIH director, forgot his name, the brand new guy. He's taking over the NIH, and he explained the whole process in detail. And a lot of it is currently still funded by Big Pharma. And so if Big Pharma is helping the NIH out to give these grants to labs like the Huberman lab, where he's doing eye research in rats to figure out if there's a new drug for glaucoma, then that kind of has to be shifted a little bit, because it's currently just so controlled by that. So if there is money in a disease, then why do you rob the banks? Because that's where the money is. But if we can shift that a little bit, and the NIH appears in this new administration to try and shift that a little bit, then maybe we'll start seeing a broader scope of where the money goes. And maybe even negative studies will tell us a whole lot. But right now, if you're a researcher and you have a negative study, you'll probably never get another grant handed your way, because it's all about building up on that. So that's on the pharmaceutical side, I totally get how they go after drugs that will make them money, and they go after diseases that are very prevalent. And then they actually set the studies up so that they get the outcome that they want. On the flip side, when you have something that is, and I left one thing out, it has to be patentable. So they have to get that patent. So they have to go for one specific thing because their molecule is this. And then you have all this natural stuff. There's very few people that are funding a large randomized placebo-controlled trial on something that no costs can be recouped. So you have a lot of people with these ideas that, okay, what happens if and there are some studies where they look at these different things, meditation, improve sleep, but they're small, and for whatever reason, they don't really make mainstream media, and people don't really talk about them. So it just costs a lot of money to do this. And I just got done doing another small trial. A lot of these things are like proof of concept, but I've got 50 people in a natural acid reflux product that I'm looking at, because that's a very common disease. And just to get 50 people, I'm not paying them, they're volunteering, we're scoping them. It's been over a year, even though I'm scoping 200 people a month. But it's just because you have to have somebody follow up. They've got lives, just like you said. It's, everybody has their lives. And so the drug companies pay the participants quite well, and they pay them just like they pay me. If you show up here, you get this amount of money. If you show up to your scheduled follow-ups, you get this much. If you complete the study, you get a much bigger payout, because it's just human nature. And so a lot of these potentially natural things that we want to look at, it's very difficult to fund it to that level where people will have the interest and follow through with it. So I am very advantageous that I have a very busy clinical practice, and my patients kind of know who I am. So when I say, hey, I'm trying this out, this is the safety profile of it, I want to see if this helps, then they are like, yeah, you've already done it, and let's see what happens. And so it's a little bit easier on my end, because I think I'm kind of known for that. And so my patients are willing to help me out. It's more of a favor to me. And yeah. I've tried a bunch of stuff over the years, and small numbers. I'm like, did it help? And they're like, nope. I'm like, chuck that. Let's move on.
Totally. But I mean, if you didn't have a lab to tinker in, you couldn't have done that. That's
Correct.
where clinical practice comes in handy, right? Again, do no harm. Now let's try this. It might work. You mentioned a couple things in there that I think are really interesting. One is the the headlines, right? The media not giving the headlines of, so a blockbuster study came out that showed that this pill has 1% over placebo for headaches, yay, right? But no one's looking at sleep or stress reduction or relationships and all these, squishy free stuff because they don't make headlines. But the problem is media is also a money-driven business. And
Mhm.
I've been in the side of, getting publicists and all this crap. You pay a lot of money to get access, to get in front of the people, to then get on the shows. And it's just this whole other game, right? And so it's money, 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 whether it's, pharma playing VC or, getting the headlines that you need by getting in front of people so that you can recoup your investment. There's just a lot of money in this game, right? And so I've tried for the last 20 years to help democratize the price of healthcare by helping people understand lifestyle and all these other things, but also don't skip the scope, right? Because if you have a precancerous lesion, or God forbid, a cancerous lesion, now is the time to get it out. So the dude who showed up 12 years later is still happy.
Yeah.
And so there's somewhere in between, I think, is a sane conversation. The all or nothing people on both sides, I think, are a little rough, right? The conversation happens in the middle. So you and Pimentel did some work, and then you started playing with some polyphenols. And it's funny because, in Nebraska,
Yeah. Nebraska.
Nebraska boy, of course, it's like watching the environment around you. They were doing something with cattle. Why not humans?
Yeah.
And so you looked at some studies on some polyphenols in particular. I'll let you talk about it. And lo and behold, it helped reduce gas and bloating, which is probably the number one reason people come out with GI complaints. So tell me how you stumbled upon this research and how you then kind of tiptoed into clinical application.
Yeah. So when I was doing the trials for this drug company to look at, is there an antibiotic for people with irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea? So that's what the FDA gave them approval for. Now, when I was in training, irritable bowel syndrome is anybody with abdominal pain for more than 3 months, relieved with defecation, then you meet this criteria. And the most common symptom isn't even part of the diagnostic criteria. It's bloating, because the pain is actually coming from distension of the small bowel. So bloating is the biggest thing. And that's where Dr. Pimentel in his mouse models was telling me before it even became a drug trial or anything. He goes, it's the gas being produced. It's either methane, hydrogen. And at the time it was methane and hydrogen. And now we know it could be methane, hydrogen, or hydrogen sulfide. And I was talking to him one day and he's like, unfortunately, we can't help the bloated, constipated person because they're producing methane. And these antibiotics that we use don't get rid of the organism that does methane. And that was kind of the aha moment. I was like, wait a minute. Back in Nebraska, they're always trying to get the farmers to decrease methane production, the burps of cows. They still talk about it. And they still talk about how can we reduce that. And as it turns out, there's a ton of data on this. You just have to go to these schools like Texas A&M and University of Nebraska, University of Iowa, where they're doing these studies. And as it turns out, I don't think they were talking to each other because one was using one particular plant material, which ultimately ended up being a polyphenol, which is polyphenols, by the way, are the things that make fruits and vegetables colorful. So it's a big fancy word, but you're eating them all the time. Actually, as Americans, we probably aren't eating enough of them. And that's probably one of the reasons why there's some health issues. I remember listening to, you're probably friends with him, Michael Pollan, the author, and in his series where he was discussing foods, he was talking about how Americans tend to get most of their polyphenols through coffee. That's where it's at. But Europeans get it through their diet. So I found out that there was these 3 polyphenols, and one of them in particular was a large stable polyphenol that got rid of this organism called Narcaobacter. And so looked into it, and as it turns out, we use it in wine all the time. We use it in beer making. It's used in our food source. So the safety was proven, and did a randomized placebo-controlled trial of people that either got a placebo or they got this. And the criteria was they had to be bloated and constipated or labeled as irritable bowel with constipation. And we had remarkable results. And that's where I was like, okay, we're onto something here. Maybe you don't have to wait for a drug company to show up and tell you what to give your patients. Maybe we have natural things available. And just like you said, I've got this lab, I've got a patient population, and was able to see that we helped 4 out of 5 people with their bloating and constipation using quebracho, chestnut, and peppermint. And then we did another larger trial where that was open label, where they had to fail everything. So they had to fail all pharmaceutical agents. And we had a 70% improvement in that. And so those were the tough, the worst of the worst, so to speak. And that was 11 years ago. We launched the product 10 years ago. And since then, I've just been really enjoying being more into this functional side, trying to figure out other things. It took me about 8 years. I feel like we're about ready to head down the path of trying to help people with acid reflux, because the current medications are associated with side effects. So it's good timing, but it's one of those fortuitous things where I'm not really sure that I would be at this stage in my life. I could just be grinding out the typical gastroenterology thing, telling people that what they're taking is probably not working because the drug doesn't work. But I've just became very open-minded to anything, and then changed my lifestyle where I started realizing, well, wait a minute, I can't really recommend taking supplements. Why am I recommending taking drugs if I'm not talking to them about sleep, stress reduction, mindfulness, exercise? Then I started really getting in my own head, because it's just knee jerk to give somebody samples of a drug and then you write a prescription for it. And then they go to the pharmacy and their insurance may or may not pay for it. And then it's, egregiously expensive. So it just changed my perspective completely.
I love that you're still doing this work. I'm excited. It's a whole other show to talk about acid reflux, but it is a big one. There are some major OTC and scripted tools out there that people are being given for acid reflux.
I have one small caveat with that. I'm not being completely altruistic about just trying to stamp out acid reflux. I have a hiatal hernia. I've scoped myself. I have acid reflux. I wanted to get off these medicines. So I tried everything available in the sort of natural space and finally figured out a combination that worked for me. So this was selfishly induced.
Yeah, but that's not an uncommon story. That's a lab within the lab, right?
Yes, exactly. I like that. I'm the lab within the lab. That's great.
It. And then there's the individual other labs that come in, right? And that's the problem. The only person that could actually control an experiment in your laboratory is you. And even your patients, with the best direction, they could go out and screw it all up, because it's the decisions they make every single day. It's very difficult, especially with, oh my God, like GI, it's like every meal that you eat, you're accountable for. But what if I go to a Carl's Jr., right? There's so much stress around, the stuff that goes in your mouth. And so that's a big one. I think that I'm very actively following that story. I can't wait for that trial to kind of round out. You're my favorite kind of doctor, Ken. You're the kind of guy that's just tinkering and all with altruism. And when something works, it's like, hey, this was interesting. Let's keep looking at it. And some really cool stuff comes out of that. So I really commend you on that operating system that you have somehow adopted in your clinical practice.
I pose this question to you, since you have quite a bit more experience as far as looking at the neuroception and the introspection. When you go into medicine, you always have this goal. There's this hurdle. Okay, well, now I need to get into residency. Then you get into residency and I need to get into a fellowship. Then you get into a fellowship, I need to get this job. And then you get this job, and my practice filled up rather quickly. And I'm like, what's the next hurdle? And then I did clinical research. And then that became the natural space. And so it's something in my head that I'm very aware of, that I really enjoy the pursuit of something. And it's made me really expand my comfort zone, because I realized that, look at everything that you've done. Look at, coming from, the meditation background, the Kung Fu background, the medicine, the filmmaking, you have to have the same type of brain. You're always doing something.
Yeah, it's a weird operating system that can get out of hand as well, right? And so I had to kind of decouple my drive with what I ended up dissecting out from my overbearing father saying, if you're done with your homework, keep studying. And I'm like, why? Because it was just like an immigrant thing. It's like, we lost everything. You got to start over. And so I had to cultivate laziness for a bit and be like, maybe I don't have to do anything right now. And maybe that's okay. But it's settled now in a really interesting place where the way I look at it is through what I call the life garden, which is I only have room for about 5 plants, and the kids and the family, the wife, my health, my sleep, and all these different areas that need watering every single day. And career is being one of those plants that tends to get overwatered. So
Mm,
I then have to take things through the filter of that and say, okay, look, I'm really excited about this problem that I'm solving at work right now. And there's 600 million people with acid reflux on the planet. And I really think I could help these people. And I'm really passionate about it. And I'm going to stay up all night for 3 weeks and get diabetes. You know what I'm saying? And it's just this weird thing that we do because we get passionate.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that's where I think we just have to temper it with the filter. And I just kind of load that into the prefrontal cortex and just be like, okay, so what am I doing right now? I'm
yeah.
overexerting, right? And and
Well,
as
I
much
love
as I
it. You
want to
just
help
have
these
this.
people.
You have this incredible ability to come up with these great analogies. I like that. I'm going to start using that. I'm like, well, what's been going on? I'm like, I've been overwatering my work, so let's go do
Yeah,
something else. I love
yeah.
that.
And you know, that's the problem is we live in a culture that only rewards that. Right? Every once in a while, you're like, wow, Ken, I met his son. What a great little boy. You know, pat on the head, right? But like those accomplishments are also scoreboard accomplishments. It's like no one says, oh, he was a polite boy or what a nice boy. He looked me in the eyes as much as they're like, did you hear he got into Harvard? Right? And so it's all of these success metrics that happen at the cocktail party that are exhausting. And so honestly, I love where you're at. If you think about it in terms of kind of like religious connotation, it's a revelation. Like, so, okay, you solved gas and bloating to a certain extent. And then the next problem that was put in front of you was acid reflux. And you had that problem yourself. And to solve that problem and help other people, that's really cool. And it's noble and it's fun. And, you know, thank God you get to call that work. Right. And
Yeah.
so then you just got to temper it with the people in your life and the, you know, the sit-ups you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I love this. I love your plant analogy. I like that. I'm gonna use that.
Please do. Well, man, what a pleasure. Always happy to catch up with you. I want to invite you back when you have a little bit more under your belt with the other study. And I know it's kind of heating up, so I'm excited to see it. I'm kind of passively with pom poms in the corner here. But I know that you wanted to offer a special deal on your gas and bloated. It's called Atrantil. Wonderful product. I've used it with my patients for a long time. So if you are that person, then check the show notes here. We'll put a link to Dr. Ken's products there. And again, you also have to sleep. You also have to de-stress. You also all of the things. But then again, use polyphenols to help balance the microbiome and knock out the archaeobacters and all the things that these wonderful doctors have found do work in clinical settings. And I can tell you right now, I have so many patients that I've recommended it to over the years that are like, hey, finally, something that worked. What was that probiotic? I'm like, it wasn't a probiotic. It wasn't a probiotic. And that's where the industry has kind of gone. So it's not all about probiotics. It's about
Yeah.
polyphenols. It's about a lot of things.
It's about a lot of things. There's a lot of data to show that these polyphenols, you feed your microbiome with fiber and polyphenols. Whenever I do a procedure on somebody, I do the endoscopy, colonoscopy, because somebody's seeing me with an issue. And then after they wake up and then we talk, I said, okay, while I'm waiting on the biopsies, let's have you start Atrantil right now, because we do know that if this is a bacterial overgrowth situation, it will help that, but also it'll feed your microbiome. And we now know that if your microbiome gets old, you'll get old. If your microbiome gets sick, you'll get sick. So this is why the polyphenols are anti-aging, anti-inflammatory. And inevitably, the person picking them up, because they have to have a driver that didn't get any anesthesia, usually a spouse or a parent or somebody, they're like, hey, wait a minute. Said something about anti-aging there? Anti-inflammatory? It's like, can I take it? I'm like, yeah, everybody in this whole building is taking it. So everybody's doing that. So it's always kind of funny because there's a reason to take it, but then there's also this reason why we should be consuming more polyphenols. If you compare the amount of polyphenols you get, it's like 5 bowls of berries compared to 2 doses. And so I tell my patients, I'm like, it's your daily dose of polyphenols if you're not eating regularly vegetables. That being said, if they're like, if I'm on the Mediterranean diet, I make sure that I cook. I'm like, perfect. Keep doing that. Just do that. That's great. This is sort of a insurance policy, so to speak.
Totally. Totally. Marty Blazer, who was also in Interconnected, looked at all these native populations that had all sorts of variety, and they're eating plants, shoots, roots, and tubers all day. and they were getting so much more fiber, polyphenols, and vegetable mass than we even see in the standard
Yeah.
American diet, that it's just a different world. And so, accommodating for that is part of reality too, in a lot of ways. Kent, what a pleasure. I'll put all your links and stuff in the show notes here. I really want to honor your time and thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you so much, Pedram. It's always an honor. Love hearing your stories, and I need to pick your brain a little bit more. I like how you put things in perspective that sort of resonates with me. So I'm going to walk away from this with several things.
Cheers, man. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.